And we are excited to welcome our delegation, including Senator Tim Knope, Representative Jack Zika, and our newly elected Representative Jason Kruff. And we appreciate them taking time. It's pretty crazy with session beginning. And we greatly appreciate their insights as we begin the 2021 session and all that entails. I'd also like to take a brief moment to thank today's sponsor, Ben Broadband. Their continued support allows us to provide these webinars to the community free of charge. Before I get going on our program, just a few brief announcements to keep you appraised of what the first month or two looks like for the Ben Chamber and our webinars. So our next webinar is next week, January 19th. And that webinar will be featuring the homelessness, the houselessness issue in Bend, some of the solutions that are proposed, and really a discussion of exactly how big is the issue and who's stepping up to help out and what are some probable solutions. And then on January 21st, I know a lot of you are waiting to get some information about the latest round of PPP, Paycheck Protection Program loans from the federal government and SBA loans as well. We'll have all the details on that on the 21st of January. So 2 webinars next week. So be watching for that. And then finally, the Chamber, along with our higher ed community, business organization partners, and others are collaborating to conduct a survey over the next few weeks. And the survey is to business owners and operators. What we're trying to do is assess what types of resources, aside from money, do you think you will need in 2021 to get you beyond the COVID crisis and start to go toward a recovery glide path. So we'll be asking what types of resources you need. Is it tech? Is it legal? Is it human resources? That sort of thing. And when you might be able, how you would like to get that information and when that information might be provided to you to help you in your recovery. So long story short, we're going to attach a link to that survey today in the webinar. Be looking for it. We know there's a lot of activity out there, and you've been asked this probably before, but this will help us as a region collaborate and coordinate our efforts to help you through recovery. So here's what's to expect for today. We're going to hear directly from our 3 legislators this afternoon about their priorities for 2021. This is the long session, so it's 160 days long-ish this year. So we expect there to be thousands of bills, and I think we'll hear from our delegation that I think there's close to 3,000 bills the last time I heard, and they'll be introduced and discussed over the session. After that, when we learn what's on deck for the legislation for this year, we'd like to get to your questions and really have an opportunity to interact with our delegation after they've shared their priorities, and field your questions and talk about what is on the top of your radar screen this session. So additional information will be provided at the end of this webinar from our legislative delegation, as well as the Chamber's legislative training materials. So if you want to know how to engage, what that looks like, how bills get formed, we'll have a lot of information at the end of this webinar for you. And we'll send all that out again in a follow-up email when we're finished with the webinar. And you can also tune in to our YouTube channel. Now, let's hear from our legislators. It's my pleasure to introduce our legislative delegation. These are 3 individuals that will represent Bend and Central Oregon at the state this session. So first up, I would like to introduce Senator Tim Knope. We all know Tim. He's been around for a number of years. He represents District 27, which covers Bend, Redmond, and other Central Oregon communities. And Tim has served in the legislature from 1999 through 2005 for 3 terms, including as Oregon House Majority Leader, prior to being elected to the state Senate in 2013, where he's been ever since. And Tim, Senator Knope, I'd like to hand this over to you to share a few opening remarks with the group.
Well, thank you, Katie and Sarah, and thank you to the Bend Chamber really appreciate the opportunity to talk with constituents, even if it's once again by Zoom. I think we're all getting tired of Zoom and phone calls, and hoping that we can have some personal contact again sometime soon. But this session is going to be quite different in the legislature, and it's going to be, at least initially, starting out virtually. And it's imperative that we get the kind of input that we would normally get. And unfortunately, that's not going to be in person. And so it's really going to be necessary, I think, for people to engage electronically. So by email, by text, maybe by the old-fashioned snail mail, and also with Zoom at times as well, and to make sure that people are doing their civic duty to hold the legislature accountable for what's going to happen, because the virtual nature of the session is lending itself to empowering just a handful of people instead of 90 legislators and the governor. And so I look forward to working on some business issues that help small business out. I think we need to look at some modifications to the CAT tax. I think we need to look at stopping the increases in the unemployment rate. I think we need to relieve businesses who felt the need to be open during the pandemic of any potential fines if they weren't spreaders of COVID. And so there's lots of things I think that we need to do for small business and the citizens of Central Oregon, but those are just a few.
Thank you, Senator Knope, for sharing that. We're going to move next to Representative Jack Zika. Representative Zika represents House District 53, which includes the city of Redmond, as well as the communities of Tumalo, Sun River, and parts of Bend and Deschutes County. Jack was first elected to the seat in 2018, is beginning his second term. Oh boy, and boy, is it going to be a good one at the State House. Jack's a realtor and engaged in the Central Oregon Association of Realtors, in addition to community service. And I'd like to ask you to provide us with a few opening remarks as well. Representative Zika, go ahead.
Whoa, not senator yet. I was kidding. Thank you, Katie. I really appreciate it. Yeah, when you get elected and you're excited, and then you go through a year like 2020, it kind of puts everything in perspective, because as an elected official going through what we did with the pandemic and the wildfire and the closures, you really spend a lot of time trying to help people, and we were able to accomplish a lot with the unemployment and trying to help people navigate the unemployment system. We helped hundreds of people in Deschutes County and Bend and Redmond, all around, try to get those benefits from closures. So something that we've seen now ramp up a little bit more are those unemployment claims. So we're still working diligently to try to get everybody in touch with the department and make sure that they get the benefits that they need. Little plug, if you need assistance or if you know somebody that needs assistance, please reach out and email us, rep.jackzika@oregonlegislature.gov. We'll do our best to get them in touch with somebody and try to get them moving along with those benefits. They kind of shook up my committees this year, so I'm on some different committees. I'm still on the Housing Committee. I will be Vice Chair of the Early Learning Committee, which is a new committee. Representative Power and I are trying to set up the Early Learning Department into its own separate department away from the Department of Education, so we can get some more dollars for our early learning, for our kids, for daycare, for preschool, Head Start, employment-related daycare systems. There's been some things that have happened where the money's kind of fallen through the cracks, little gray area on who's in charge of what department or what area, what program. So we're going to make sure we can try to put that in black and white, and so we can get that taken care of. That's one of the priorities of that committee. And then also I've been involved with the Deschutes Child Care Task Force, which the Chamber is a part of, which I really appreciate your input and participation in that group. And I've put together quite a few bills to submit this session that reflect the views of that committee, getting going with trying to remove some of the red tape for childcare providers with zoning, HOAs. City of Redmond just cleared up some zoning issues with the permit process. So I think we want to try to maybe look at that statewide to help out. So there's a lot of things that we're going to try to accomplish with that new committee. I'm still on the rules committee, which is where all the controversial bills go, especially the ones at the end of the session when we're trying to rush it to get to sine die. So that one is there. And they added me to general government. So that'll have a lot to do with OLCC, the marijuana tax. Deschutes County has some issues with the marijuana tax. So I think we're going to be looking at that in that committee. So I'm happy to be a part of that. And then they added me to a Ways and Means subgroup with transportation and economic development. So we're going to need to see a lot of that going forward after the wildfires and the pandemic. So I'm excited to do that and see if we can get some additional dollars into 97 where that Cooley Road intersection goes. We need to get that started and completed so we can solve some of those traffic problems. So I've got a lot to talk about, but I'll just end it right there so we can probably get into that later.
Great. Thanks, Representative Zika. That is a long list and really important committees that you're on as well. Look forward to working with you on a number of those issues. All right, finally, introducing Representative Jason Kruff. Jason represents House District 54, which covers the city of Bend. He's serving his first term, baptism by fire, as an elected office at the State House. However, he's not new to the legislative and governmental affairs. Jason began his career as a public defender and currently serves Deschutes County as the Deputy District Attorney. So he's served on a number of local boards, including court-appointed special advocates, CASA, to those of us who participate in that, and Central Oregon Board, and the Bend Park and Recreation Board as well. So he is well hooked into our community, and we welcome you. And Representative Kruff, would you like to share a few opening remarks?
Sure. Thank you, Katie and Sarah, and nice to see you, Representative Zika and Senator Knope. And thanks everybody from the chamber for being here today. I'm day 2 of this job, and I filed last February, and what a different world February of 2020 was compared to now. And I will, I drove over to Salem yesterday for the swearing in, and there were some pretty stark reminders of what a struggle 2020 was and what 2021 has started. I drove through Detroit and Gates and those communities and saw the devastating effects of wildfire. And you saw some houses that somehow and businesses escaped, and then other areas completely devastated. And, we're in the chamber for a day that's usually full of ceremony, and we were spaced out and wearing masks, and we weren't open to the public for safety concerns. And I think all of us, the conversations that we had yesterday in the Capitol were about how much hard work that we have in front of us. And as Senator Knope talked about how different that work is going to look because of much of the beginning of the session being virtual. So, we're going to have to try new ways to stay connected, to make sure the people of Bend and the people of Oregon have a voice in our process. My office is going to experiment. It's going to be, virtual cups of coffees and stuff on Saturdays and after hours, and maybe virtual office hours, just so we can make sure that people have access to the process. And we're going to keep experimenting until we get it right. So, Katie, actually, I left the DA's office on Friday. I was there just shy of 16 years. It was an incredible honor to represent Deschutes County in the state of Oregon in that capacity. And I was, it was an emotional day leaving that office that I'd had so many incredible experiences. And so as we talk about priorities going forward, to me, it's first and foremost is COVID and COVID recovery. And if we're not healthy, what else really matters? And making sure we have the health systems in place to give healthcare to the people who need it right now, make sure that we're rolling out the vaccine as effectively and as quickly as possible. And then dealing with the consequences of COVID, the disruption that we've seen in our schools. I have a 3rd grade daughter who's been out in the living room / classroom since March, and I'm grateful for all the efforts of our teachers to do their job in a completely different fashion, but we know this has not been the best of school environments, and hopefully we'll be back in school soon and we can begin to make up for that lost time. And we know, interesting article in the Source about some of the mental health issues in our community and how that's been exacerbated during COVID, and probably the angst and anxiety all of us feel, and making sure we have the resources dedicated to that to help folks. And then how do we recover economically from this. We know that certain individuals and certain businesses have been bearing the brunt of this, and how do we target our resources to keep our businesses afloat and make sure that we can have a speedy and robust economic recovery. Which kind of leads into my committee assignments. I am going to be on the Judiciary Committee, which I think is sort of in hopefully my wheelhouse, given my legal career. I'm on a Ways and Means Subcommittee for Public Safety, and then I'm on the Economic Recovery and Prosperity, basically the renamed Economic Development Committee, about how do we recover from the economic impact of COVID, and how do we recover now in the short term, and what's our vision for long term. So, and I'll admit, I spent, everybody can read my resume. I spent most of my career, or all my career, in the public sector. So I know I have a lot to learn, and part of that is reaching out to organizations like the Chamber and other people to make sure that I am hearing the concerns of our constituents and all Oregonians as we begin to piece back our economy. So thank you for having me here today. I look forward to this discussion, and I am grateful for the opportunity to the Chamber to have me here today.
Thank you, Representative Kruff. And we are grateful to all three of you for your service. And boy, we need it more than ever these days. And as we look forward to a lot of challenges together. Now I would like to turn the program over to Sarah Odendall. Sarah is our Contractor for Government Relations here at the Bend Chamber of Commerce. She heads up a lot of our legislative outreach and corrals our members in identifying our legislative agenda and things that we need to be watching over the course of the session. And I'm going to let her go ahead and take the reins. Go ahead, Sarah.
Great. Thanks, Katie. And thanks to our legislators. We so appreciate your time. We know how valuable an hour is out of your day, especially as we begin to embark upon the 2021 legislative session and all that will bring. So thank you for your time, and thank you for your insights that you're going to share. Before we jump into the program, we just wanted to share very briefly some of the key issues that the Chamber is going to be focusing on this legislative session. We have 4 key priorities that are somewhat historical in nature, but we are going to keep pressing on with them. It's no surprise that the first issue we are going to be working really hard to advocate for is housing. Housing has been a perennial issue in Bend as we continue to grow. We're going to continue to build upon the work that we've done in the past with our partners, with the state, with our legislative delegation to address housing challenges as we embark upon continued growth, somewhat exponential in factor. And it could look like a lot of different things. It could look like first-time homeownership incentives. It could look like traditional affordable housing programs. A focus on workforce housing is obviously very important for employers and businesses and attracting employers here to Central Oregon. And then, of course, transitional housing and shelter for people who are experiencing homelessness in our community. Those are all really important parts of the housing picture, and we're excited to get to work on it. The second key priority for the Chamber is childcare. And I'm so encouraged to hear from Representative Zika about the creation of a unique and individual childcare early learning committee, as it's such a different type of education than traditional K-12, and oftentimes gets subsumed into more traditional education discussions. So really excited about some of the great work that's going on. We are going to continue to work with our community partners, work with our strong legislative delegation to identify creative and unique solutions to solve this perennial problem. We are in a childcare desert here in Central Oregon, which has been exacerbated by COVID and the lack of resources. I think that if the past 10 months for families and parents has not shown the importance of quality and affordable childcare, I'm not sure what else would. So we'll be excited to continue that work and look towards pilot programs and creative new unique funding solutions to help this specific sector of our population. Transportation and infrastructure obviously goes kind of hand in hand with housing. First of all, we're really thankful that the citizens of Bend passed the transportation bond back in November. But that's really just the first bite at the apple in terms of addressing the city and the region's transportation and infrastructure issues. We're going to continue to work with partners in that sense to look at the bigger picture. What are the needs going to be for the next 10, 15, 20 years in terms of infrastructure and transportation so the city can grow? We've obviously seen the influx of migration over the last 10 months, and we can continue to see that grow. So we're going to look at smart city solutions, ways that we can address smart growth, and that could look at traditional transportation, roads, bridges, but it all infrastructure that make men to work and live. And last but certainly not least, economic stability and recovery. This is, I think, the underpinning to all of the work we do in the advocacy community. We're going to continue to work with our partners to support our residents and the nonprofit community that has given back so greatly to those in need. We're going to continue to support the small business community and really work towards different kinds of programs that can continue to keep our small businesses alive, as they truly are the heart of our great city. So those are just a couple of the issues that we're going to be following. As Katie mentioned, there's upwards of 3,000 bills that have been introduced thus far, which is somewhat overwhelming to think of the magnitude. But with that, I would love to turn it over to our legislators and hear about your priorities. We'll get started with Senator Knope, and we'd love to hear what you envision for 2021 and what's on deck for you personally.
Thank you, Sarah. Well, of course, yesterday, the three of us and many other legislators took our constitutional oath of office to affirm and uphold the constitutions of the state of Oregon and the United States of America. And I think it's really important that we take those seriously. So kind of first on my agenda is defending the individual constitutional rights of our citizens and our constituents. And so, we'll be looking at legislation through that lens, because I think there are already some things that are full frontal assaults on the rights of individuals and parents. And so won't be backing down from defending our constitutional rights. But as I mentioned earlier, I really think that helping small business out, getting people back to work, I think Representative Kruff had it just right. We have to deal with the COVID issue and the recovery of that. I think that's got to be the number one thing. And so to me, that's, helping people live through this era that we're in as responsibly as we can. So making sure that businesses are able to operate, because government is just making it harder and harder, even during this time, to do that. And so I'll have several bills that will help small businesses do that. Of course, I'll be advocating for OSU Cascades Student Success Center. Again, the price tag's gone up a little bit on that, so we're going to add a couple million to what we were asking for last time. And anybody who understands this, and nobody more than Representative Krupp, our judicial system is in need of some judges here in Deschutes County, because as we come out of this COVID, the courts are backed up, and not by a little bit, by a lot. And so we need to make sure that we have the opportunity for people to seek justice. And so those are just a few of the things. I've got lots of bills and not enough time to explain all those, but we'll be putting those out there for people to see and to interact with, probably like we've never done before, just because we need to find new ways to push things out to people, to communicate with them what we're doing, since it's going to be a little bit harder for them, I think, to engage this time around.
Great, thank you so much for sharing those comments. I think there's such a broad swath of issues that you all deal with every year at the legislature. It's interesting to see how those come together, and we appreciate, obviously, the alignment that we've had in the past, and look forward to that continued alignment. Representative Zika, you mentioned the start of a very long list of issues in your introductory comments, and we'd love to hear a little bit more about your legislative agenda and your priorities for 2021.
Yeah, after hearing what your agenda is, it sounds like we're going to be on the phone quite a bit with housing, childcare, transportation, and economic recovery. I think those were my committees that I'm in. So I think we'll have a good relationship going forward. I mean, that's it. So the number one priority, of course, is the rebuild after the wildfire. So I have a bill drafted the day after I had it started with some of these housing groups that we talk with to try to make sure that we can get everybody that lost their house, manufactured home, commercial business, industry, roads. There's a lot of things that got destroyed in the wildfire that you have to try to make sure that we can maintain and build. And with our land use codes the way they are now, there's some roadblocks in the way. So a lot of these folks might have a court battle in their way to try to rebuild their house. So we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. So that there's a committee bill that they're working on. They set up a special committee. I have a bill as well to try to say that if you were there before, you can be there again, and that there's nothing, you can just rebuild. So hopefully that one, we can get that through so those families can get that off their mind and not have to worry about that. We also heard there's price gouging going around with the clearing of the debris. So we want to make sure that we can stop that and curb that. So because the insurance money that somebody gets back from if their house was destroyed and you spend it all on just debris removal, when something should cost 30 and you're getting charged $120,000 for it, then that's not right. And you can't rebuild and you've lost that money. So that's a priority. Like I said, with the pilot project that we passed in Redmond for housing, for that 485 units of affordable housing in Redmond, I'm going to try to take that one statewide. Bend has the program similar as well, but that's the only ones in the state are just Bend and Redmond, and I'm sure there's a lot of cities. Pendleton has expressed an interest. Eugene has expressed an interest. I think Medford. So there are some cities that would like to give this a try, and so we're going to try to get that one passed this session so other cities can enjoy that. If they have the opportunity to incorporate land like Redmond did with Deschutes County and Bend did with private land, then they should have that opportunity to do so. Just another tool in the toolbox. No mandates, just if it's available. Increasing the IDA payments, we have that where it's tax deductible. They're thinking about taking that away and just adding more general funds into that. I'd like to see it kind of in tandem in both. So we're not doing away with those tax deductions from individuals that would like to contribute to the IDA to help people out with down payment assistance. So I'll be working with them on that to try to see if we can make sure that we can get a best of both worlds on that. And you're right, with homelessness, we're experiencing it. We're seeing more of it. And so we'd like to try to make sure that we get some additional funds for our homeless shelters and make sure that we have the zoning correct and that you can, not just there during the pandemic or from the wildfires, but going forward, that they can place these homeless shelters in the pre-existing structure. If it's run by somebody that knows what they're doing, that should just be allowed. So we can try to get that in there and help some of these folks that are on the streets, especially in our area where it gets so cold at night. We just need to have that. And there's some limitations about how many months you can have a winter shelter. That shouldn't be there because we can have a winter from September to sometimes May in our area, and it goes below zero. So there's a lot of things that we can do with housing that need to be in effect. Ben had trouble with UGB expansion, so we're looking into seeing how we can come up with ways to help out with that expansion so it doesn't go out 10 years and cost $1 million for cities. Daycare, we had bills for daycare that were credits for the providers, credits for the teachers and the parents. We're pursuing those still. Helping out with funding with the employment related daycare system. So if somebody there's like, if you get a raise and you go from $15 to $17 an hour, then don't quote me on exactly, but that's around about where it is. But if you get that raise, then you lose a big portion of the employment related daycare funds that were offered to you. And that shouldn't happen because then you're faced, well, I don't want the raise because I'm going to be missing out on money for my daycare for my kids. And I'm actually taking a hit for that. So it just doesn't make sense. There's a lot of things and a lot of programs that we have that are in existence that just don't make sense. And we need to revamp those and bring them up to where they should be. I mean, let's see. Oh, we have career training tech. I have about 20 bills. So trying to remember them all offhand is a little difficult, but we also am working with our Redmond superintendent to do correct intern training that if a business takes in an intern from a high school, they actually can get a tax credit on that for the money that they took to train and to make them a better employee. So it's exciting as well. And I'm with the senator. We are going to be advocating very actively for OSU to get that Student Success Center, and then also for our judge, maybe potentially 2 judges in Deschutes County. So that is a very big priority.
Great, thank you. Well, we'll be excited to see the list of 20 bills when I think some of them have been introduced and read across and have numbers now. So we'll certainly actively start tracking those as they make it their way through the process. So last but certainly not least, Representative Kruff, if you wouldn't mind sharing some thoughts about the incoming 2021 session, your inaugural session, if you will, in a very strange and odd year, and some of the priorities that you have and hope to pass in this coming year.
Sure. Representative Zika and Tim and Senator Knope, we're not necessarily going to agree on every single thing. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but I know 2 of the things that we do really agree on is continue to push for funding for OSU Cascades and what kind of impact that'll have on our community. And I think we're going to work well together to hopefully make sure that happens. That's been something that's been in the discussions and pipeline for a number of years, and hopefully this session that'll something be happen. I think that's a main priority for our community moving forward and continue the growth and the impact of OSU Cascades here on Central Oregon. And then also Senator Knope and Representative Zika talked also about our court system has been for the last several years at the top of the list for not having enough judges. When you don't have enough judges, you can't process cases. Justice delayed is justice denied. And if we don't have enough judges to do the work of this growing community, then our court system isn't serving our community as well as it could be. So I think we're all going to push really hard to make that happen. I really appreciate that the Chamber's #1 goal is housing. To me, so much follows from making housing a priority and making sure everybody has a safe and stable place to call home. I mean, I think, and I'm not trying to be glib here, but I think the Ben Bolton must have in their queue the newspaper article they write in October about how we're in scramble mode to find a warming shelter. I mean, it's basically the same. We're on repeat on that, and we need to figure out a permanent solution to that to make sure that those most vulnerable people, especially in the winter months, have a place that they can be safe. I took a tour of First Presbyterian Church when they opened up early, and it was incredible to see what they were able to put together, but that should not be the solution moving forward. So I think housing, I spent my career in our criminal justice system and our juvenile justice system, seeing people who lack stability, people who really struggle, and lack of stable housing was oftentimes a common thread. And so we have to make sure that's a priority. If we talk about accessing education, that's really hard to get your kids to school or engage your kids in school. We don't have a safe place to live. When we're talking about making sure that we have the workforce that we need in Bend and Central Oregon to grow our economy, part of that is making sure that our workforce has the education and skills they need, but also making sure that they have a place to call home. We have, everybody knows this, our town's getting more and more expensive. We have to make a push to make sure there's affordable housing for people below certain income levels, and also a push to make sure we have an existence of workforce housing. I'm impressed with the momentum that the city of Bend has in affordable housing projects and the work they've been able to do to piece together different funding sources. I serve on the Parks Board. We just agreed to waive 150 more STC fees for affordable housing projects. I'm going to continue to push us on that other elected area to do as much as we can, and certainly push on the state level to do as much as we can. It's just got to be priority #1. I mean, the phrase housing first makes a ton of sense. So that's top priority for myself. And then, I'm a product of Oregon public education from high school to college to law school, and I'm incredible and grateful for the investment Oregon made in me. And I'm going to keep pushing that the momentum that we had for school funding in the 2019 session continue. It's unacceptable that 1 out of 5 of our kids doesn't graduate high school. And that's got to change. And then, climate change is also the crisis that we're involved in. I'm not sure that because of the nature of the session, what we're dealing with, how much work is really going to happen on that. But I think we have to be mindful that, of what a beautiful place Central Oregon is in the state of Oregon, and what we can do to protect it. And I think I'd be remiss, I know we're all, three of us are struggling of what a virtual session is going to look like. One thing I am appreciative of is people will be able to testify remotely at committee hearings from basically your home. And I think that is going to make a big impact, especially people who live a distance from Salem, being able to participate. I know it's not necessarily that there's differences between being face-to-face with people, but I'm hopeful that people take advantage of that opportunity. I'm going to continue to make sure people know about that. So if you want to make sure you're testifying in Salem, you can without having to make the 2.5-hour drive.
Thanks so much for sharing that. It sounds like you've got quite an aggressive agenda. Again, moving into the first session here, will be interesting to see in over the next 160 days, kind of the key issues that parse out, because there is so much work to be done. So reminder to all of our participants that are viewing the webinar, if you have a question for our legislators as we move into the Q&A portion of the program, please feel free to type that into the Q&A box. We'll do our best to answer them. If you have a specific question for a specific legislator, make sure to include his name in that, and we'll make sure that we can get to as many questions as possible. I think the first question I would like to ask has to do with what you just said, Representative. How can citizens, ordinary, regular people that are on this webinar engage with your offices? We know that times are challenging. We're not going to have a bus trip or a legislative day at the Capitol. Those types of events aren't happening this year. So we'd love to hear from the three of you about the importance of advocacy and the importance of hearing from regular citizens who are your constituents. Maybe Representative Zika, we can start with you and share any thoughts or words of wisdom about how you'd like to communicate with folks.
Sure. I'm going to miss that part of the Capitol when we have the big groups like SEIU or the Realtors or just any advocacy groups that come in, and it's a really special moment in the Capitol. So we will miss that, and hopefully we can get back to seeing that soon. But we've been trying to, with email, social media, phone calls, and having these types of events with the groups to try to get the message out, hear what everybody what's important to them, what are their priorities. And so I mean, I'm not going, I get right back to somebody on Facebook if they DM me. So it's pretty easy to get in touch if you can just find that social media outlet, or give a call. The state capitol phones are a little wonky, but we get those messages. That's probably the hardest way to get in touch with me, is through the state capitol, just because that Jabber program is horrible. But anyway, Facebook is a great way, and email is a great way to get in touch. And I will be doing more of these and trying to have virtual town halls on social media as well, to let everybody know what's going on inside the Capitol. It is a shame that it is closed, and public input is probably the most important thing that we can have. So the virtual testimony, while you won't have to drive, but people that don't have broadband, they're out of luck. So it's a frustrating scenario where I'm hoping that we can get the Capitol open again, and we can start having more public input. So thank you.
Thanks. Senator Knope or Representative Kruff, any other words about advocacy, the importance of advocacy, and how folks can engage with you?
Oh, sure. Senator, go ahead.
I would just say that Representative Zeke, I think, hit it really well. Email and Facebook are probably, honestly, the best ways to connect at this point. As much as we appreciate phone calls, we don't have staff that are going to be in the building to answer those phones. And so, they'll have to do that remotely, and it's super clunky. So, write it down in an email, send it to us, try to be as on point as possible. If you need an appointment, want an appointment, ask for that in an email, and we'll try to get something set up for that. But it's definitely going to be a lot different. And, I will be connecting with the larger community virtually as well. I just don't think it's the right time to have in-person town halls, as much as that would be super fun to do. So looking forward to that, though, later on.
No, well, I mean, I don't, I guess I don't know what a regular session looks like. I've certainly been in the building and there's certainly a buzz in that building every time I've been there. And that was not what yesterday was. Yeah, email I think is going to be a great way to get, and I appreciated Senator Knope's comment. Like we do get lots of emails, but if you have want an appointment, be specific about that. And like I said at the beginning, we're gonna experiment. We're gonna have virtual office hours. We're going to have virtual town halls, a virtual cup of coffee. I think we are gonna really push hard to make those at times that are span a different set of times. We know not everybody can show up at 9 o'clock or at noon or 5 o'clock or even during the week. So we're going to make sure that we make myself available at different times. And I really think that the thing that we're going to all have to push ourselves is not necessarily just waiting for people to contact us, but going out and connecting with the community and connecting with different groups. And we know that there's virtual meetings, take for example, neighborhood associations and things like that, and making sure that we are myself available for those groups and going out and connecting in the community and sort of finding people where they are to make sure that the widest range of people have voice in our process. I think this is going to be a really challenging session. I think, and I don't know, I'll be curious what Representative Zika and Senator Knope say. I mean, I'm day 2, so I kind of got the feeling things are going to be slower and more deliberate than normal, but maybe that also makes us more focused. I'm gonna push myself to make sure that we are finding creative ways to stay connected.
Great, thanks. Certainly is going to be a grand experiment, I think, for everyone on how to engage and communicate and truly advocate for things that are important to us all this session. So thanks for that. So let's move to COVID. There's been some questions in the chat box and in the Q&A box around COVID, specifically around supports for small businesses. Obviously, Bend is a small business town. This is the heart of our community, is our small business community. Many of them have been severely impacted by closures, openings, reopenings, closures, reclosures. What are some ideas and some thoughts on how we can continue to support the business community as we emerge from COVID and start to move towards vaccination and immunity over the summer and start to truly open up our economy again? How about we start with Senator Knope on that one?
Thanks, Sarah. I mean, honestly, the best thing to do really is to reopen our small businesses, because the state can't afford the bill to keep them shut. So when people say from government, we're all in this together, we're not, if you're not going to support the small businesses that you've just shut down, who've spent their lifetimes, working and building a business only to have it shut down and, big box stores stay open. And, everybody is seeing that, and I think the community doesn't like it. And so the best opportunity we have is to get small businesses reopened. I think they can do that in a responsible way. And, that includes, our restaurants and our health clubs. And I think there's been a horrible price that has been paid by those who own them and those who frequent them and those who work at them. And, it's not just them, but I mean, those are some of the key ones that have been so hard hit. Obviously, our event venues have just been decimated. And so the state does not have the money to make all that up. The federal government doesn't have the ability to continue to borrow the money to make all that up. So the best thing to do is to allow them to open up, since the best estimates that we've had are 1% to 3% of COVID cases are coming from that sector of the business community. And it does not seem like good public policy to focus on a very minor aspect of our COVID problem. And so getting businesses open, getting vaccines out there for those who want them, I think are all going to be critical in helping us recover, because if businesses aren't out there making money, that means they can't pay taxes. And if their employees aren't employed, they aren't paying taxes either. And that's going to be tough on the the state budget. And being a new member to Ways and Means that spends all the money, there's not going to be a lot to spend if we don't have those dollars available.
Representative Kruff, how about you? Any thoughts on small business and keeping our economy open here in Bend, things that you can do to help our small business community?
Yeah, no, I mean, small business is a lifeblood of our community, and you know, I was really appreciative that the emergency board allocated $100 million a few days ago for commercial tenant and landlord relief to help Oregon small businesses that have fallen behind on their rent payments. And you know, I think number one is how do we get our businesses open as we lower our infection rate in our community. We wear masks, we practice social distancing, we be safe, and we make smart individual choices. And we push as hard as possible to make sure the vaccine is being rolled out as quickly as possible. When we can be vaccinated as a community, then we can truly have our businesses open in a safe manner. I think I said at the beginning, we know, you know, certain businesses, everybody's struggling, and there are obviously certain businesses that are struggling a lot more than others. And to me, it's about taking a targeted approach to help them. You know, I know Representative Zika did a lot of work during the last special session for $200 million in relief for people for housing assistance. And I was really appreciative of those efforts and the efforts of the legislator and the governor to make that happen. You know, our revenue forecast is better than we thought in March. It's not necessarily great, but it's better because of, you know, federal assistance and state assistance that has you know, sort of kept our small businesses afloat. I mean, if you look at the revenue forecast that just came out, and there's sort of a graph in there, I encourage everybody to look at it, what the expected recovery rate. It's better than we thought, in part because we've been able to use federal and state dollars to help those businesses. And you know, part of the problem is we don't know what the end date is, and there's a ton of variables. But I think everything that we know right now is if we can keep small businesses afloat, if we can stop layoffs from becoming permanent, the recovery will be quicker and more robust. And I think that's got to be our priority moving forward.
Thank you. Representative Zika, any thoughts on that?
I think my colleagues hit it pretty much on the head there. I mean, we need to get our businesses back open. The vaccine needs to have more readily available. The federal stimulus and the state funds that are helping, it's just a drop in the bucket. We need to get things moving again. We need to get our businesses open. I mean, I wrote a letter to the governor a while back saying that such a small portion are coming from small business. The contact tracing is not showing that small businesses are the big factor for COVID spread. So we need to make sure that, you know, if the big box stores can be open, so can the small ones. And they spent a lot of money and a lot of time to make sure that they were being safe. They put a lot of measures in for social distancing, making everybody aware of the policies for each individual business posted on the front door. And if they're in compliance with OSHA, then open up. Let's get this moving again. And we were able to do with that with schools. You know, we're starting to see now schools are going to be starting to open because we got the liability protection for schools passed. So that's on its way. We wanted to get hospitals and small businesses in there too, but we ran into some troubles with the last special session. So that'll be something that we work on as well. So we have to get those people protected and make sure everybody stays safe. But if we're doing that with it should be open. So I think I've been pretty vocal on that one.
Thanks. Reviewing the questions that are coming in, that we could probably spend 3 hours answering questions and asking questions from you all. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about homelessness and housing. And this obviously being a top priority for the chamber and for our community partners. Wondering what your thoughts are around how to continue to address this situation, not only at the state level in terms of providing additional funding. Representative Zika, for instance, you mentioned zoning for shelters, things of that nature. But what about the root causes of homelessness that I think are really part of our society? Again, this could probably be an hour-long discussion, but just if you all have some thoughts on how we can address those at the state level and turn those into actionable policies that can help us solve this problem that is really showing its face in our community, and we're wanting and needing to help it. So how about Representative Kruff? Do we want to start with you and kind of do a round robin there?
Sure, and yeah, that's a great great question. You know, part of it is, to me, I think housing sort of a all hands on deck. Contemplate every idea. It's a combination of, if we talk about Bend, increasing density, increasing types of housing, potentially small housing, cottages, different things of that nature, making sure our land use and zoning laws work for those different types of housing that we're going to need, and making sure that we have the land necessary to meet the demand that we have. I mean, one of the projects I'm excited about for Bend is the Central District, revitalizing that part of our town, but also with an eye towards building affordable housing units in that area. Root causes is a great question, Sarah. And part of it is like how interconnected everything is, right? If you don't have real education and economic opportunities, it is very hard to sort of make your way in this world. And so to me, it's about taking a holistic view of the issues that are facing people in our community. One, making sure that we have a school system that works for all of our kids. Making sure that we're getting all of our kids ready for the future. I think part of that means investments in career and technical education, pathways to apprenticeship programs, making sure that our community colleges and our four-year universities are properly funded, so there's that continuum of education that's available. I mean, COCC is an incredible resource in our community. We get in, and we are fortunate to have that. We need to continue to support that. And then I speak to things that I've seen in my work. Too many people who suffer from untreated mental health issues, too many people who suffer from substance abuse issues, and making sure that people have the resources that they need to get back on their feet and be successful. I'm really glad to see that there is, at least on the House side, that there is a committee and a focus on addressing mental health issues in our community. I think that has the potential to make incredible positive impacts both there in Bend and throughout the state of Oregon.
Thanks. Senator Knope, Representative Zika, anything to add on that question around homelessness?
Yeah, Sarah, I would just say that on homelessness especially, study after study shows that 80+% of homelessness is driven by addiction and mental health issues. And so if we don't resolve those issues, we're going to continue to have the homelessness issue, even if we bring forward enough housing units for people to live in, which we are clearly lacking. So we need more of all types. ADUs, I think, are a really important piece of that, to continue to make sure that people have the ability, because that also helps on density as well. But we need varying types, because people's needs are different, and we need to make sure that we have single family, multifamily, ADUs, low rise, any number of options for people, townhouses, condos, what have you, to make sure we're meeting the needs of all the people in Bend and those who are coming here, as well as the rest of Central Oregon. And Representative Zika's bill that we worked on, creating a pilot project, is going to be incredibly helpful. And when those units get on the ground and get built, and the same thing for Bend as well. And I can tell you, having spent a good portion of my career in the housing industry, it does not move fast. And especially when government is involved, which it always is. And so it's been a very slow process. And obviously we need to speed up the timeline for which urban growth boundaries and urban reserves are implemented. And so we don't get into the situation where we continue to have these really critical points where we just lack the land necessary to be in development, which, as we all know, just drives the costs sky high, which is exactly what's happening right now. High demand, little supply equals high increased prices. So, those are all issues that I think we need to apply good public policy to, that can be mitigated and resolved in some way.
Thanks. Representative Zeke, any final thoughts on that?
The thing about going last is you can wrap it all together now.
I know, it's great, right?
So we have a great nonprofit in our area called COVO. It's the Central Oregon Veterans Outreach, and they provide wraparound services for our veteran homeless population, where they'll take a truck out there and they'll give them food, and if it's a shower truck, get them a shower, find out what their needs are, get them into temporary housing, and then they can get them in touch with the social worker. We can kind of find out if it's a mental illness, if it's a substance abuse, addiction matter, or if they just want to be a hermit on their own. So we need to prop up these types of nonprofits and make sure that they get what they need, and make sure that they can and do their wonderful work that they do. And so that's a priority that we need to try to make sure that we have those wraparound services to identify what the need is. I think that was what Representative Kruff was talking about. And then on Senator Knope talking about housing, that's a big deal. Housing supplies. Look at our median house price is over $400,000. Creeping towards 500,000. I mean, we're not only saying that there's no affordable housing, that if you work at Target or Starbucks, that you're going to have to go live somewhere else, and that's a big deal. And that's shouldn't happen in our small community. Like when you have a lot of land that's 1/10 of an acre going for $200,000, and the permit prices are up to $60,000, and you think in your mind what affordable housing is probably $150,000, and you've already gone over that with just the land cost and the permits. You're not going to make affordable housing in Central Oregon. It's tough. And I know we're coming up on time, so
Thank you. Gosh, we have just barely scratched the surface, I feel like, on all of these issues. There are so many important issues, and we have, I think, a handful of questions in the chat box that I don't think we're going to be able to get to today because of our time limitations. But I want to share some of the themes that are coming out, just because I think they're really important to share with folks. Obviously, there's some questions around racial justice. There's questions around the disproportionate impact of COVID on communities of color and under-marginalized communities. Obviously, that's going to be a big issue that we're going to work towards tackling this year. There's some very specific questions around wildfire recovery. I mean, this is something, on top of COVID, we've got wildfire economic recovery to deal with. So some very specific questions around that. And then, of course, taxation. I wouldn't be remiss in not mentioning that there was a recent study from the Oregon Business and Industry that talks about the tax burden that's going to be placed onto Oregon businesses over the next course of the next several years. So what does that mean to businesses and small businesses as we start to emerge from COVID? And what are some steps that policymakers can take to relieve that burden, perhaps? And then, there's questions around safe storage for firearms. There's questions around additional mental health issues, just so many questions that we couldn't get to today. So what I'd like to propose is that we can put a transcript together for our legislators and their staff of some of these questions. And as we talked about earlier in the program, reach out to them, reach out to their staff. These are all issues that are going to come before the General Assembly this year and are going to be questions of policy that need to be decided. And so I think that, I don't want to speak for all of them, but I think that they probably would love to engage with constituents since we didn't have the full opportunity to answer all of our questions here today. So with that, I just want to thank all of you for your thoughtful responses. There's such a broad range of issues that you all are going to be contemplating, and some really hard decisions to make when it comes to budgets and how to fund some of these priorities in our state. So thank you. And with that, I'll pass it back to Katie, and we can wrap things up and close out the webinar today.
Thanks, Sarah. I really appreciate you moderating today. And thank you to each of our delegation for joining us today again, and for your service. For the rest of you, stay tuned. The Bend Chamber engages in the legislative process pretty robustly. If you have an issue that you think we need to pay attention to, representing the community and businesses specifically, encourage you to reach out to us so we can start a dialogue. We have an advocacy council and an active engagement program, and hope to be effective this year. Also want to thank our presenting sponsor one more time, Bend Broadband, for allowing us to bring this content to you for free. And it's just a great service, we feel, to the community to be able to bring great information, including what is in store for the 2021 legislature. Stay tuned. We hope that you join us again on the 19th and again on the 21st for homelessness, and then an overview of the new federal funding relief program for businesses. We thank all of you and hope you tune in next week. Take care.